there, Rio here, and hopefully you saw my message about today's work. So actually today is the 16th of November, and normally, and we'll look at the calendar in a minute, today is our develop it day, and that work needs to be done. So if you saw my message, you know that I had a little bit of a mishap, and I'll just kind of show you the status of it right now. It's doing really well. But it definitely is slowing me down, which is not necessarily a bad thing, although at times it really feels that way. But I worked this morning and I got my development where I felt like I wanted to. But I'm going to continue because I want to get ahead of the game, especially because after Thanksgiving we'll have some, based on the schedule changes I'm going to do. So anyway, I'm just giving you the heads up about that. This item, as you probably hopefully already know, I'm going to make it available today, but it won't be due until Sunday. And then before tomorrow's done, I'll have the next JavaScript, the weird parts, uploaded as well. So anyway, let's just turn and let me show you what I did, and we'll go over it. So, like I said, today's the 16th. Normally this develop at 5 is here, but I've moved it, which means we kind of have back to back. It's funny, we moved from adding one item to having back to backs for 2 weeks. And the reason is that, of course, 16th I had to move because of my schedule, which I really am sorry. This is the first time I've actually done a due date because of my inability to get something done, because I like to hold myself accountable, but sometimes stuff just happens, which is why I try to give you flexibility when I can. Now, having said that, if you do want to submit past work, please do. We're getting to the part of the semester where obviously we're honing in, right? We're on week 14 here. So anyway, but next week, because of Thanksgiving, I've moved the develop at 6 also to a Sunday. And then we'll have our JavaScript challenges, and then our next to our last develop it. And then when we roll into December, right, there's that one we were just looking at, and then we have one more here, right? So anyway, I just wanted to give you that heads up about the way that is. And the other thing is that, and luckily, I think not luckily, some of you have already contacted me to come see me specifically today. But if you can't make it on campus, today or this week, definitely want to, I'll be around Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week. And then, of course, as the campus is closed. Okay. Now, that actually makes me want to move this one as well. And I could double up here. So the reality is I've just kind of set this as a placeholder for us. But if you don't get it done until this date, I'm not going to mark it as late, but I just want to give you, like, here's where you should target that. And the reason I say that is as I'm sitting here looking at it, I really don't like to put anything over the Thanksgiving holiday, because those of us who actually like to take a break during Thanksgiving, I want us to be able to do that. So just know that, right? So I'm glad I kind of looked at that because I hadn't really considered that until now. Okay, so going back now, looking at our course, right? That's the calendar. So looking at what I have for us this week. Again, apologize. I'm using my alternative hand for mousing off and on just because it hurts to go long periods of time with my. And by the way, what I did is I fractured my elbow during a trip during a normal run for me. So here we are. We're at develop at 5, which again has been moved. I haven't changed anything about this part of it, right? So the idea this week is for you to, get a really good start on your HTML and CSS. And for those of you that are like me, that are using something you started on, right? I was able to go further, but I've added to my application, in this case, the login, and I'll show you at least where I've gotten it so far. But really, the detail of what I'd want to see here is really if you reflect back upon what I required originally on the develop at 1, is if you want to see the detailed requirements on that, that's really what I look for, right? Is that kind of thing, that kind of requirements. So, but really it comes down to, right, these two things right here. First is that it needs to be responsive and mobile ready, right? And I'll show you what that means for me in a second. And the other thing is that, and this is, you may not get to this part of the development this week, but depending on how much your particular project, if you're starting from scratch, right, that will be your challenge there. So, but if you're not, like in the case of mine, I was actually able to at least connect up in a, not in a meaningful way, but at least in a I can show you way my modules and my new method for my login into my page. Okay, so when you do the output this week, I'll probably have you do something very much. You'll see mine, but what I plan on doing here is just giving you an update on my modules, right? So what I've added to them. So I noticed some of you just gave a link to a folder. That's fine as well, and maybe I'll do that because it won't make it so long. It's probably a good way of doing it. I haven't updated my project scope, only because I'm a little bit behind here, right? So, but I'll show you what I did. Okay. And before I do, just one last thing. You know, we're following along the book here, actually. So in the book, this is the chapter where we implemented Bootstrap. And I know some of you have asked me about using Bootstrap in jQuery. And of course, I can't say no. I am challenging myself not to do it just because I really want to learn and be able to be able to use pure JavaScript. But there's nothing wrong with it at this stage in your development to do that. I just know that when I do it, I won't, because I think you have a good example in the book of what it looks like to use jQuery in the way that they've shown it. But when you see mine, you're not going to see that I'm using jQuery. Okay, so let me move over to mine. Right, so in my develop. Oh, and that's the other thing is I'm going to make sure, and I'll put this in the write-up, that you commit your code. Most of you did, but a few of you didn't. So make sure you commit and push your code up for this. As a matter of fact, make sure you at least have one. I would want to see more than one. And I haven't been strict at all about your commits as far as when you do things. And really the reason is because you're all at different levels and you're all doing a little bit different in this case. So in my Kitty Cat Match 2.0, I've added to my index file, I've added my header for my Kitty Cat Match. I've added a section called Login. I am using Flexbox, so the Flex container, and the reason I'm doing that is that's how my original Kitty Cat Match was set up. And it made sense to me to go ahead and use this layout for my login. Okay, so here's what that looks like. So over here, right, so in this case, here's my login, my email, right, and there's my login, and there's my sign up. So the nice thing here is that, you know, again, because it's mobile ready and responsive, those Flexbox work really well to just stack things on top of each other. Okay, so I've also decided, since looking at the way Firebase was implemented the user login, which is my next part that I need to do. But because it implemented login with just looking at adding event listeners on the button and not on the form, not actually having a full form tag, I decided to keep that to get me ready for using the Firebase login. Okay, so you can see here, so the div, I created a section for login. I gave it an ID of login, and then I have a section of game, because this represents the game, and then on here I have a class of visible. And then in addition to those things in my CSS, I've added a couple things. I've added some form element styles, which I tried to match to my kind of my color theme. And then I added some input padding as well, just to give those touch targets. And what I mean by that is, imagine these are on mobile. You want to have those to where people can easily touch those. So I did a little research and found some different philosophies on the way you make these touch targets more mobile friendly. So that's what I ended up with there. And then after I got that done, I added one style, sorry, to my global, which is visible, right? So right now, and that's the class of visible, which is why you see this, right? But you don't see the play, the actual gameplay itself. And I'll show you then what I did. So once I got that hooked up and working the way I wanted it, then I moved on to looking at implementing a login handler. And this was interesting. This was such a good, again, such a good test of how well that I personally translate what I learned, what I was exposed to with the coffee run, and using it in my own way. So this is different, but the same setup of, adding this, setting up the, default value of the object. That's no different. But then I set up the constructor function, really looking at selector here. So then in my main, what I did, oh, that's the wrong main here, is I created a variable called login selector. And in this case, I wasn't looking at the way they had done it with the form. I'm looking at a button ID, and what I mean by that is on here, right? So I have an ID, so I want to find, when I want to add some functionality into that button. Just this is my first phase, right, again of it. So that's why I did that. And then I added a login handler, a local variable into my main. Sorry. And then I set up by doing, instantiating a new login by calling it with the login selector. And then just for now, I just had add login handler, which is the method that I call. So you can see on here. And I'll come back. Well, actually, let me just do this and we'll talk about what I did here. So on here, what I did is, again, because if you look at this relative to Coffee Run was doing just a $ form element equal to $ selector, right? And so what I did is I used the vanilla JavaScript of saying this dot login element is equal to, and in this case I had a query selector finding this specific ID. Then I just console logged that out to make sure I had it. Took me a little bit to do this because I had to convert from jQuery to vanilla, but it was great to see that it got working. So then my one method, which is the add login handler, I was just doing a little bit of console logging here to see what that was. And then I added a add event listener on the click, and I captured the event just to see what was in there. And this is really where I've ended, right? So this is the part where I've just gotten it to where it can at least simulate the idea of once a user logs in. And all I'm doing here, and again, this is just placeholder right now to at least show you the concept of what I've done. Okay, so let me just show you and then we'll come back. So I don't have to fill out these, but the idea, of course, would be, right, and we'll come back later and do validation on this. And this is where, handling it from the Firebase is going to be obviously my next step that I'm going to need to do. And because these things don't matter, what it is there's an event listener setting on the login, and when I click it, coming back here, right, when I click that login, then it's going to run this callback that does looks and gets the get element by ID, looks at the login, and it toggles visible. And then on the game, it toggles visible. So it basically says if it's there, take it off. If it's not, put it on, which I like toggle because it's a nice, easy way to do it. So when I click here, what it's going to do is it's going to take the login off, and then I have the game there, right? So here's where I'm stopping for today, just to say I think this is good progress, and you know, that's part of what I'm looking for here is making progress along the path of getting this operational, getting this to where you want it to be, right? Because I know the thing I would really want to do, right, is obviously not do this, but this is just to show the concept of, so you can see what I'm going for. Okay, so that's what I have. What I want you to do is when you, and you'll see a print screen of mine, so I'm going to go back to standard here, right, because I want you to do a print screen of your output, your HTML, in a mobile. So you can select the device you want, do a print screen here of that, and then give us a updated print screen of your modules, that work that you have done. And then also, if you want, you could do it on your index file or your CSS file, you know, or you might just kind of block those to say, here's what I've added to that, you know, really targeted more to what you've done. And what I mean by that is, in my example, right, I because nothing, what was important for me was just adding these sections, right, because the rest of this was already stuff I had already. So adding these sections, having that class, and then maybe showing in my style how I've added, right, these particular elements, right. But you can also ask, right? So let me just bring you back here before I let you go. So you can also ask people, right? If you're curious how they did something, that actually might be the more helpful interaction this week, right? Is to show us, you know, I've given you an outline of what that would look like, right? So I'm, you know, give a print screen of what your the status of your interface now, right? And I showed you mine today. I showed you one at least way I moved it down the road by implementing, you know, the input elements and the buttons, and then putting it into sections, and then hiding and showing and toggling that off and on. But obviously that's not the way I'll handle it when I actually do Firebase. But for now, it at least moves me down the line of having that. So I guess what I'm getting at is this. You know, it would really be good to ask, you know, if you're not sure about something, like, how'd you do that? And you know, obviously it's easier for you to see mine because you can see me interact with it, right? So, you know, get creative in the way that you do this. But I know the majority of the time of what you're going to do here is really just spend it on getting this done, right? Because the idea is that this last part of it where you share is not the most important thing. The most important thing is how much progress are you making, okay? All right, hopefully that gives you enough at least to get you ready, set up for success on Sunday. Chat's been, I've seen not much activity in there. I've seen a little more activity with students coming to see me. So, you know, just make sure for wherever you're at in your project that you're getting help when you need it. All right, peace out.